Burlesque, burlesque, let's talk about burlesque and stripping. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cherry Cheeks and today we're gonna address that question that is on everybody's minds. Is burlesque stripping? First of all, I want to make a disclaimer that these are my own thoughts and my own opinions based on lots and lots of conversations I've had. I'm not myself a stripper. Because of that, there are going to be some nuances to this discussion that I'm going to miss. I am by no means an expert. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend that you look up some important resources on Google or talk to people you may know. If you have people like a sex work organization in your own community, to reach out to them and try to see how you can support them and what they may need. So to understand burlesque and where we are today, first off, it's important to understand where burlesque came from. When we talk about burlesque, it's really important for us to first acknowledge our past. We would be nowhere where we are today without our burlesque legends, like we mentioned before. However, it is really easy when we talk about our past and burlesque legends and the golden age of burlesque and the highlight of burlesque. It's so easy to do it with rose-colored glasses, especially if you haven't lived in those times or if you don't connect with burlesque legends and hear their actual stories and their own retellings of their own history up to where we are today. It's really easy to skip over those nuances and skip over that really core part of burlesque, which is it was stripping. And burlesque performers back in the day, burlesque legends, they were walking strippers. Anywhere that basically had a stage, a burlesque performer existed. And no matter where they existed, no matter where they performed, every one of those venues, they had to follow what were called blue laws or nudity laws. There was a lot of legends who went to jail often, and when they did these performances, again, it depends on the venue, they had to hustle and work besides their performances, so they actually had to go into the audience, find what was called the muck, and they wanted them to buy them alcohol, and the more alcohol that customer could buy for them, the more money they made. They'd be all about that man and his ego and his desires. And burlesque performers back in the day, also they had to work what was called the circuit. There was actually multiple circuits around North America and Europe. You'd have your own agent who would get you these bookings. You had to make your way from A to B to C to D to E to F, all the way through to Z and all the way back to A again. And as soon as you completed a circuit, you would do it again. Each time you did that circuit, the second time you would go through, you would be able to get more money until eventually you were a headliner. It took literally a village to make one burlesque performer. As they were doing this, they were all about the clients and they were all about the audience. Blue laws and nudity laws, they changed a lot. In some states, you may not be allowed to do specific moves. Or in other countries, you had to actually present your acts to an authority figure and they would say whether or not your act was appropriate for their stages. And if not, they would tell you what you had to change and then you would change it before you went on stage. Eventually, everyone had to wear pasties, had to deal with what a producer wanted, and it was about the producer's show. They would have to deal with stage door Johnnies. You can't talk about burlesque today without acknowledging where we came from, and a lot of that eventually over time and with things like blue laws, again, my light died, so I may look different now. As I was saying, there was that split and that performance style went into many different directions, and that's how we got to where we are today. So, where are we today? Today, as I mentioned with that split, we do still have burlesque performers and we still have stripping. There's a few differences and those are important for us to all be aware of. Those differences, they include things like payment and money. Often we have a guaranteed rate, and as a performer I can negotiate with producers how much I get paid and I can set my fee. Depending on the show and the venue, you can make anywhere from about $20 to maybe $150 per act. If you're a headliner, you can make a lot more than that. Where as a stripper, you don't get that. You have to work and you have to hustle to get your money, and you rely solely on the tips that your customers and your audience are paying you. Not only are you making that money, often, depending on the club, you have to actually pay for your stage time. But as a burlesque performer, I don't have to do that. Talking about tips from people, that's another difference, is the audience and the perspective. Generally, burlesque is advertised as empowering, a form of self-expression. It's from the performer's point of view. As a performer, I have 100% control over my act. I can choreograph it as much as I want or as little as I want, but it's about me and my self-expression. Even though I fully believe there are those aspects of you should be caring about your audience, they're the ones who are paying money to see you on stage, I do think it's really important to still focus on them. the main focus typically in burlesque that you see is on the performer and their expression and what they want to present. Whereas a stripper, you are 100% about your audience and your clients. You can't turn it off. Whereas a burlesque performer, as soon as I get off stage, it's up to me. I can treat burlesque as a hobby or as an industry and a business, or I can do both. Whereas a stripper, it is 100% an industry, and it is about your business skills, and it's about your people skills and your entrepreneurship. There is no space for it being a hobby. Going back to the audiences, burlesque audiences are incredibly diverse. It's a really heavily advertised, like, you should go out with your girlfriends, or you should go out with your partner on a date, or you should go out with your friends, and it's advertised and it's really socially acceptable. Where at a strip club, it's generally a lot less of that, and it's more male focused. As well as a burlesque performer, typically my acts, depending on the show, again, there's a lot of depends. My acts tend to be anywhere from 5 to 6 minutes, where as a stripper, you have a set, and a set is multiple songs that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, and you have to do that multiple times a night into the late hours. Whereas a burlesque performer, you're performing only once that night, or twice at most. So when you look at those differences, it becomes very clear that burlesque and stripping are two very different performances and two different performance styles. Both of them are very legitimate, and both of them deserve their place. But why does this matter? If I'm a burlesque performer and if I just want to do burlesque and be sparkly and rhinestoned all day, why do I have to know about strippers today? In society, we have this thing called marginalization. One area that's not actually talked about very often unless you're in that circle itself is sex work. Typically, sex workers are targets of violence from both the public and police. If something happens to them while they're on the job because of their job, often they can't go to police for their help. Stripping is often seen as disempowering, where burlesque is seen as empowering. And because of their job, often they have trouble with receiving things like funding, business loans, or anything that they could really use to help them financially. We saw that at the very beginning of this pandemic, when across Canada there was an emergency fund that was given out to most of the nation. And if you were a sex worker and that was your only source of income, I know a lot of people who were not able to get that money because of their jobs. We see a whole flood of laws trying to criminalize sex work and criminalize their clients even. Stripping and sex work is highly stigmatized, so often you have people around society who are like, what happened in your life to get you to this point? I feel so bad for that person. Oh, this is so disempowering. It's not a classy profession. Stripping is also seen as being exploitive, and you have no autonomy and you have no control over your own being, when in reality a lot of strippers and sex workers are in those jobs because they enjoy them and because they like the work. And it might be hard work, but there's a huge part of that work that's so important to society, and we need that in society. And instead of addressing things like, okay, if it's dangerous, how do we address that? We criminalize the profession itself instead of trying to make it safer for them. We make it more dangerous for them, and we make them go even more underground. And all of these realities, the criminalization, the stigma, the hard work itself, all of that gets ignored, and yet we see people highly appropriating their performance. So in burlesque, one of the common things that we can see is calling yourself a stripper. You see sexy dance, which is stripper moves being used in dance classes, which is seen as empowering and seductive and how to be sexy for yourself. Or you have pole dance classes which are sold as fitness or empowering or how to be sexy for yourself. Or you see people wearing pleasers and you see people wearing them because they want to be sexy or that empowered person. Or you see it in the media. You see strippers maybe in the background, or you see movies that are fully about people working in strip clubs. Maybe they completely messed up the industry in describing what the industry was. Maybe they only highlight the bad parts of the industry and don't talk about the rest of it. Maybe they've never even consulted a single sex worker for that movie, so they are probably missing a lot of information. Or maybe they did consult sex workers or strippers and didn't pay them, didn't credit them, didn't do any of the things they should have done for that hard work. That is something we see very often, and all of the things I mentioned in this section, they are especially true and more common if you are a person of color, if you are two-spirit, transgender, or a queer worker, or if you're a worker with a disability. But as a burlesque performer, I almost get none of that, and so When we talk about things like this, it's very important to acknowledge that yes, of course there's going to be overlap in certain areas. I know people who have lost their jobs because they did burlesque, or they've lost partners, and I know burlesque performers who do face stigmatization. The fact is, it's a lot less common. If you're a burlesque performer who has experienced all of these things to different degrees, then absolutely, your experiences are 100% valid, and I'm not taking that away from you. But I'm addressing burlesque as a whole, and as a whole, we don't see that, and we don't have that societal stigmatization like sex work and strippers do. If you're a burlesque performer who only does burlesque and not stripping as well or sex work as well, now what do we do? What's my job? Because of everything I've already mentioned, burlesque is not perfect. Burlesque, in my mind, is a direct reflection, magnified, of real life society. So when you see things like stigmatization and criminalization of sex work and stripping, that floods into burlesque as well. And it's very easy to see individuals say, oh, well, burlesque is classy, or burlesque is empowering, or burlesque is not stripping. Because of this, sometimes there's a lot of crossover. I know a lot of performers who do burlesque and strip, or who do burlesque and sex work. I've seen people who only do burlesque who might isolate people who do both, or who will say they're not a real burlesque performer because they're too dirty on stage. Nope, that's all BS. Our history and our performance comes from stripping, so you cannot say that we are better than our founders and we are better than our burlesque legends who started as strippers and who were working strippers. Because stripping still exists today, we cannot say we are better. Period. So based on all of those points I mentioned, you can probably assume what I'm going to discuss next. Do I identify as a stripper, and can you identify as a stripper? Well, you can probably assume, based on all of those points I made, that I do not identify as a stripper myself. I do say that I strip, and I say that burlesque is a form of stripping. However, I'm not a stripper, and if people ever ask me about that, I have to be very conscious to make that distinction to them if they ask, and to make sure that there is not that classism that I mentioned before. If you can call yourself a stripper, I am not the authority figure. Burlesque is very much a self-made industry, and so there is no one rule to rule them all. If you do burlesque and stripping, absolutely, you do you. If you only do burlesque, I would encourage you to maybe be a little bit conscious of your language and have a few conversations if you need to. I did say that burlesque has a lot of our own things to work through, but you'll see the vast majority of performers and industry professionals are actually very sex positive and very supportive of sex work. If I'm not a stripper, or if I'm not a sex worker, what do I do? As a performance style that is very much alongside stripping, it is very important that we are conscious of that distinction down the middle of what's the difference and whether or not burlesque is stripping, but also to be aware of our history, where we came from, and also to be aware of current day events and all of these different things that impact strippers and sex workers. Depending on where you live, you may have an organization which is probably run by sex workers for sex workers, and if you can, I would highly recommend to donate to them. That can be either donations through money, sometimes they need food for food hampers, or clothing that they distribute, or other resources that they ask for. Education. Educate yourself. Educate your friends, educate your family. Sex workers and strippers often have to do a lot of emotional labor for questions that you can probably easily Google yourself. I would say go to Google, go to YouTube, and educate yourself on things like criminalization and laws around sex work, as well as what the job even is. I know it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's like, educate yourself. Google's your best friend. On the other hand, Google's kind of your enemy, because there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of important information that's not actually found. And if you find out that you've been using inappropriate language or phrases about sex workers, or made inappropriate jokes about them, it's one thing to address those and change your own behavior and your own patterns, but it's also another thing to address it if you hear your friends making jokes or using inappropriate language towards sex workers. That's always really needed if we want to make sex work less stigmatized and safe. Next up is believe sex workers and strippers. If they tell you something is important to know about, you probably should know about it. If they tell you that they feel empowered in their work and they love their job, believe them and be happy for them and be so excited that they're doing good in their career. If you do have friends who are sex workers or strippers, they tell you that, please don't tote them. Strippers, sex workers, even burlesque performers, a lot of us, we have names for, we have fake personas for a reason and different names than what we use in real life. A lot of the time, that's for safety, especially in sex work and stripping. What if all of that is too much? What if you've tried Google, you've tried finding documentaries, but they all miss the picture? Then can you go to somebody for advice? Sometimes yes, it depends. I would say, like any kind of emotional labor, always ask people if it's okay if you come to them for advice, and pay them for their labor. And that goes with if you go to a club or if you watch somebody perform, make sure you're tipping them. Don't be one of those people who just sits by the side and just watches. Don't be one of those people. And buy merchandise if they have merchandise. If they have a special online website where you can buy content, buy their content. Make sure you're giving your money if they're giving their time. And that's it. We made it to the end of the video. I know this was a little bit more of a serious video, but as I mentioned before, burlesque is, in my mind, it is a magnifying glass of real life, and it's really important to acknowledge that we're not a perfect industry or community, and to really address our own biases within our community. I think these are really important conversations to have, and like I said, I'm not a stripper myself. I only do burlesque. If you have anything that you think could be important to address or make, please, I would love to see what you have to say in the comments down below, and let's chat. Let's hopefully destigmatize sex work within burlesque and make our industry a little bit better. Until next time, I hope to see you again soon, and you can like, subscribe, and hit that cowbell to get notified when I upload next, and I will see you next time. Bye. D to Z clubs and strip. If you're the three professionals, that they would frequent I can't say frequent. Oh, and those tend to be predominant and class. I can't and classes. You can't say we're better. I can't clap.